Hello my parasocial friends. Last time we parted ways, I proposed a challenge to complete all the challenges in the Crucible League whilst playing like a casual player. No guides, just jump in and play. First off, I chose Marauder because I looked up what ascendancies each class has, and so I settled on Juggernaut. Reason being, it looks like a very tanky class, which would mean I would die less. Additionally, I would like to bring your attention to this. Item filters. For me, it marks a very thin line between software inside and outside the game. It's something you have to look up on the internet in order to use, but then again, it's not as intrusive as something like Path of Building. There is a default filter in-game. I'm not gonna bore you with me playing through the acts, so this will be just a short summary with some explanations along the way. In my mind, any build has to complete 3 key steps in order to be viable. It needs to have a source of damage, in short the way you deal damage, either by yourself or using minions, and how that damage can go around your opponent's defenses. Source of damage also flows into the next step, which is survivability. In short, how you deal with incoming damage. There are 5 elements of damage: fire, cold, lightning, and outside of that physical and chaos. There's also reflected damage. Characters do not have an inherent way to mitigate any damage, but the game connects basic stats with ways to prevent damage, which means certain characters will be, let's say, funneled more towards these ways. Strength pairs up with armor, dexterity with evasion, and intelligence with energy shield. This is reflected in item bases as well. Items you will find in the world will have different variations of armor, evasion, and energy shield. As far as I know, there are no items with all 3 of these attributes. Lastly, movement and sustainability. We have to talk about movement, which is how you dodge big AoE effects, as well as just move around the map in general. Your character by default is insanely slow, but you can make it insanely fast with modifiers to movement and action speed. So coming back to this character, the game plan is deal pure physical damage with attacks or maybe bleeds. We will sustain with regeneration and leech, and we will move around with leaps or dashes or charges. Let's keep it simple. I like simple. Simple works best in my opinion. That, and also the fact that we're not researching or following a guide. Anyway, next point, skills. In PoE, you do not unlock new skills with level ups. Instead, you can equip any skill gem on any character as long as you meet the stat requirements for that gem. The more linked gem slots you have, the more powerful your skill can become, because there are active skills and supporting skill gems. In total, you have 3 pieces of gear with 4 sockets: helmet, boots, and gloves, and then either 2 pieces of gear with 3 sockets, the one-handed weapons, or a shield, and 1 or 2 pieces of gear with 6 sockets if you're using a 2-handed weapon. Keep in mind you can have 2 sets of weapons and that you can level up gems in your unused second set. Path of Exile is a RPG, so you have a wide variety of buffs you can strengthen your character with, as well as debuffs you can inflict on your enemies, which is why you can have this many skill gem slots. That is by design. I think the best way to see how the character performs is to just include the encounters from Crucible Forges at different levels. Throughout the acts, because I already have one character leveled up, I could access my hideout, which meant I could experiment with different combinations of different skills. If you're playing Path of Exile for the first time, it doesn't really matter because you're probably going to be following a guide or not, but keep in mind that most skill gems you can buy for basic currency when you finish the campaign. So you don't have to worry about, oh, I'm not gonna get this skill gem, or I'm gonna miss this skill down the line. All in all, it's a great way to get to know the gameplay mechanics. Just try out different combinations of different skills. In PoE, it's extremely important to pay attention to specific words, because skills have tags, which correspond to certain multipliers. If a passive skill says that it increases melee attacks, well, that only means skill gems with the tags melee and attack. Physical damage increases only applies to skills which deal physical damage, and so on and so forth. Side note, if anyone from GGG sees this by any chance, a very handy quality of life update would be to include a show stats window in the passive skill tree, similar to the Atlas passive tree. Or even better, make the game calculate in real time at least your actual damage and life on items. The reason for this is simple. Look at this piece of gear. It says it increases my maximum life and adds some physical damage to my attacks. Well, the problem with that is that as you level up and add passive skills to your passive skill tree, you have to remember all the multipliers you have added to your character. So adding, for instance, 50 life, while not that impressive on paper, it will actually give you 150 life instead, because the total sum of your +% maximum life on the skill tree adds up to 200%. So each point of maximum life on the gear is actually 3 points. And adding some physical damage to my attacks actually increases my damage by a lot, because all these physical +% physical damage multipliers adds up to a certain amount. You can estimate more or less these values, but why offload that mathematical burden on the player? Different characters will have different multipliers, and overall there's a lot of math you have to keep up with. The game could just recalculate it on items in real time, and that way you could see at first glance which flat values on items are better for your specific character. For percentage values, you could add a total value which you already have on that number in parentheses, for example, or by pushing a button. I don't know, maybe it's just me being a little bitch. Let me know what you think in the comments.
Okay, future me is taking over. Here I am killing Dominus. I will show you the passive tree in just a bit. Currently this character is level 84. So we have gone immediately towards Born to Fight and picked up Strong Arm. I rushed this way. When I started having problems with accuracy, I took Versatility, because it's just 2 points away. And then I moved towards Glancing Blows. And then I moved towards the Physical Damage, Physical Mastery node. And then I moved down here towards Aggressive Bastion and Razor's Edge, because I settled on using swords, because swords have this implicit modifier which increases accuracy, and I was certain that this character would have some problems with accuracy, because I'm not pumping in dexterity, and also I'm not picking up any accuracy on any of my gear. So as I moved down the passive skill tree, I picked up some life, and then I moved again towards swords. The way I was picking out my skills, passive skills, was that if I was surviving the encounter, I just pumped more damage. And as I started dying in Crucible encounters, I started taking some defensive nodes on the skill tree. So basically, I rushed all the physical masteries and sword masteries. And after that, I picked up armor and health here, and then life regen from here. And here I'm going for the tireless. So because our chance to block attack damage and spell damage is doubled, that means that thanks to our Crucible League, we can get some pretty insane shields, because some of these are giving us plus 12% chance to block spell damage. So that means this piece of gear will give me 24% chance to block spell damage and just minus 5% chance to block. When I finished the campaign, I decided that the main source of damage will be bleeding. So Crimson Dance is a very overpowered passive skill tree, as it increases the amount of bleeds you can inflict on your enemy up to 8 times. So the way I understand it is that base amount of bleeding you can inflict on enemy is 1 times. So if I can inflict bleeding on an enemy up to 8 times, but it deals 50% less damage, then it's like I've inflicted bleeding on an enemy 4 times. So it quadruples the amount of damage you can deal with bleeding. And then I picked up the bleeding masteries here and here. So, as I said, this build is pretty straightforward. Moving on to ascendancies, I first picked up Unstoppable because my character was just ridiculously slow. So I didn't need any damage or any defense at first, so I just picked Unstoppable first. I started to deal less and less damage, so I picked up Unflinching and then Unyielding. And currently I have given up on the Unstoppable in the place of Untiring. This character is not fully ascended yet. Now I can talk more about the skills. I'm using Reckoning because we're blocking a whole lot. As you can see here, I have capped on the chance to block attack damage. So we're blocking a lot, so I'm using Reckoning with vulnerability and Hex Touch in order to inflict vulnerability on the enemies. I also put in Close Combat because I didn't know what more to put in this combination. I thought it would give me a little bit more damage from the Reckoning. Moving on to my second skill, I'm using Corrupting Fever. Even though it's a spell, it deals physical damage. All the physical nodes apply to Corrupting Fever as well. And also I picked up 2 physical masteries, maximum physical attack damage and physical damage with skills that cost life. The reason for the skills that cost life is that I'm using Life Tap on my main damaging skills, which is Shield Charge currently. I'm using Life Tap, Shield Charge, Chance to Bleed and Cruelty in order to buff my bleeding damage, but it would be better if I could put in additional Brutality, because it deals more physical damage then. Anyway, moving on. I am using a whole lot of auras. Precision with War Banner, I'm not actually using War Banner because I'm currently unable to use it due to lack of mana. Sometimes I summon the Stone Golem, so it gives me more life regen, but most of the time it's dead. I'm not even bothered. And this is my sustainability. Steel Skin with casting when damage taken support, and Enduring Cry regenerates practically my full life, because Enduring Cry is not supported by cast when damage taken. I could change Steel Skin to Molten Shell, or maybe scrap it altogether and use Immortal Cry, multiple cries. That's something to experiment with. And lastly, I have Blood Rage, Tempest Shield, and Pride. When I use Corrupting Fever, it will deal 40% more damage because it is a skill that costs life. Same with Shield Charge because it's supported by Life Tap. Practically all of my skills which I'm using are costing life. Vulnerability is supported by Reckoning, and Reckoning is free, so it just works. Flasks that I'm using are Chaos Resistant Quartz Flasks in order to get phasing. I didn't realize I would need phasing because I got stuck so many times on mobs with Shield Charge that I just decided to use the Quartz Flask. Also Basalt Flask in order to get more armor. Sulfur Flask because when I'm standing in place it will boost my life regen, and also it will give me increased damage. And Silver Flask for Onslaught, primarily because that's the only way to boost my movement speed. As you can see, this character is not very fast. Recently I realized, because when I was playing Path of Exile, I thought to myself, okay, so I'm gonna get increased armor on all of these, and it will just stack. And recently I figured out that no, it doesn't stack. And that's about it for this update. When it comes to gearing, I'm not sure what are we aiming for. Oh yeah, avoiding elemental ailments. I'm using the Pantheon to avoid being frozen. I'm also using the Soul of Tukohama because I think that the game treats you as being stationary while you're using Shield Charge, because I'm not moving, I think. If it works that way, then cool. If it doesn't, well, I'm gonna think about what to do next. We're not getting shocked because of Tempest Shield, and Ignites I don't really care about. And that's about it for this update. If you want to chat with me live, you can follow me on Twitch, you can follow me on Twitter to get updates when I'm live, and you can subscribe to me on YouTube to follow this journey. Lastly, I'll say that I didn't make any progress on the challenges, which is terrible because we're already like a month into the Crucible League. Yikes. And Diablo 4 is dropping down in like 3 weeks, so yeah, not a lot of time left. Okay, now that is really it. See